Out here in the wild country, money could buy land, cattle, even men's loyalty. But it couldn't buy love. Clara Whitmore knew that well. A rich widow, polished and proper, stepping off a carriage into a town that didn't want her. They whispered she was too soft for the dust, too fine for the mud. Then he appeared. Elias Boone, a cowboy built like a giant, broad as a barn door, feared as much as he was respected. Some said he was too dangerous. Others swore no woman could stand beside him without being swallowed whole. But here's the thing, Clara saw something more. Something worth risking her pride, maybe even her life. And one night, in a whisper meant only for him, she said the words that would change everything. Too big for me, but I'll try. Like this story so far, if it's pulling at something in your chest, or if you just love a good Wild West mystery, go ahead and like this video, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss the next chapter. And tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories ride. Now back to the tale. 1874, Texas. The sun hung low, hot and merciless, over the town of Dry Creek. Dust swirled along the main street as wagons creaked and boots shuffled across the cracked earth. The church bell rang once, sharp and hollow, echoing against the clapboard buildings. Folks looked up from their business because a new carriage had just rolled into town. Polished black, pulled by two matched bays with their coats shining like oil. It wasn't the kind of carriage you saw here. This was cattle country, where men smelled of sweat and horses, where women wore dresses mended at the seam. The sight of that coach rolling through was enough to make men spit tobacco and women whisper behind gloved hands. Inside sat Clara Whitmore. She stepped down when the driver opened the door. A tall woman draped in a cream traveling dress that looked like it had come straight from New Orleans. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed her dark eyes, and her gloved fingers clutched the handle of a parasol she never once opened. She moved with a grace that didn't belong in Dry Creek. A widow, folks murmured. A woman with money enough to buy anything she pleased. The gossip started before her heels even touched the dust. That's her, an old ranch hand whispered from the saloon doorway. Widow Whitmore, bought up the Carsons spread north of town. Too much land for one woman. She'll learn fast. Clara heard them. She held her chin higher. Her eyes swept across the street, past the gawkers, past the sneers, until they stopped at the figure leaning against the hitch rail in front of the saloon. He was a giant, the kind of man you noticed even if you didn't want to. Broad shoulders that stretched his faded blue shirt, hands that looked built for swinging an axe, and a jaw set like carved stone. He stood with his arms folded, one boot hooked on the rail, the sun turning the edges of his hair the color of copper. His hat shadowed most of his face, but not the eyes. They were sharp, steady, watching her the way a man sizes up a storm on the horizon. Clara's pulse skipped. The townsfolk noticed her glance, and whispers spread faster than wildfire. "She's looking at Boone," someone muttered. "Lord help her." Elias Boone didn't move. He didn't tip his hat. He just kept watching as the widow straightened her back and walked past, her skirt catching dust. By the time Clara reached the general store, the whole street was still buzzing. Inside, she pretended to browse. She picked up a spool of thread she didn't need, a jar of preserves she'd never eat. She wasn't there for supplies. She was there for a measure of something she couldn't quite name, courage, maybe. A sign that moving here, buying that ranch, hadn't been the biggest mistake of her life. The door creaked open behind her. Boots heavy, deliberate. She didn't have to look to know who it was. Boone's voice filled the room like distant thunder. "Ma'am." Clara turned, her parasol still in hand, though she gripped it more like a weapon than an accessory. "Mr. Boone." "You know my name," he said. Not a question. "It was in the papers," she replied. Her voice came out calm, though her heart thudded. "They wrote about the trial, about how you walked free when 3 men swore you killed their kin." A flicker crossed his face. Anger, regret, she couldn't tell which. "They swore wrong." The storekeeper froze behind the counter, pretending to stack cans that didn't need stacking. No one wanted to be between Clara Whitmore and Elias Boone. Clara held his gaze. The man was too much. Too tall, too broad, too full of quiet power. But she had land. More land than any woman could run alone. And this was the man who could guard it. "I'll need a foreman," she said. Boone blinked, slow, like the thought hadn't once crossed his mind. "Why me?" "Because the men in this town fear you." Clara didn't soften the truth. "And I'd rather have that fear working for me than against me." The silence stretched. The only sound was the ticking clock on the wall and the faint rustle of Boone's thumb brushing the edge of his belt. Finally, he tipped his hat low. "Your choice, ma'am. But if you hire me, you best be sure. Folks'll talk. They'll say a woman like you shouldn't trust a man like me." Clara felt the eyes of the storekeeper boring into her back. She thought of the whispers outside, the wagging tongues that had already judged her before she'd even bought her first sack of flour. She thought of her late husband's voice in her head, telling her she was too delicate, too naive. Her lips curved, faint but firm. Let them talk. Boone's jaw flexed, like he wanted to smile but didn't know how. He gave a short nod and left the store, the door banging shut behind him. Clara exhaled only after he was gone. That night, she sat on the porch of the Carson ranch house, lantern light flickering against the wide fields. Her land stretched farther than her eyes could follow, but it felt like a prison. Empty halls, creaking floors, and the weight of silence pressing in. From the dark edge of the yard came the sound of a horse snorting. She rose, lantern in hand, and walked out just far enough to see him. Boone, sitting his horse, watching the fence line like a sentinel carved in the night. Clara should have gone back inside. Instead, she whispered into the darkness, words she thought no one would hear. "You're too big for me," she said softly. Then, with a tremor in her throat, "But I'll try." She swore she saw his head tilt, like he'd caught the sound. But he didn't move, didn't answer. He just kept watch, silent as stone, while Clara stood on her porch, heart hammering with the weight of what she'd just admitted. The first days on the Carson ranch came with stares, whispers, and the crack of suspicion in every corner. Clara Whitmore could feel it in the way the ranch hands carried themselves. Men she'd inherited with the land, rough and weathered, who had been loyal to her late husband's name but not hers. They didn't speak their doubts aloud, but she heard them all the same. Too fine, too delicate, too much silk for a place of blood and mud. And then there was Boone. When Elias Boone strode into the yard that morning, the men stopped what they were doing. A giant shadow fell over them as he led his horse to the corral. He didn't bark orders, didn't puff his chest. He simply tied his reins, rolled his sleeves up past his forearms, and took to the work. And the men watched. They watched him lift fence rails by himself, beams it usually took two of them to haul. They watched him mend broken boards with hands that were steady as stone. They watched him take a kicking stallion and bring it calm with nothing but a low, gravel voice and a hand pressed against its neck. Clara watched too, though she tried not to linger. From the porch she kept her posture regal, chin high, eyes sharp. But inside, her pulse raced at the sight of him moving through the yard like he'd been cut from the very land itself. By noon, the sun burned high. Boone finished watering the herd and walked past her steps without a word. She thought he might tip his hat. He didn't. That evening, supper was served long after the sky had turned purple. The ranch hands filled the long wooden table, laughing too loud, their voices spilling over plates of beans and cornbread. Clara sat at the head, poised, a porcelain figure in a house that smelled of sweat and horses. Boone sat near the end, silent, eating with slow, deliberate motions. The others gave him space, half out of respect, half out of fear. Clara caught herself staring at him more than once. He never looked up, but she knew he felt it. After the men left, Boone lingered by the door. Clara gathered dishes, her skirts brushing the floor, her hands trembling against porcelain. He stood there, too large for the frame, like he might split the house in two by accident. "You don't eat with them often," Boone said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Clara froze, then set the dish down carefully. "Is that advice, Mr. Boone?" "No, just an observation." She turned, her dark eyes finding his. And what do you observe, exactly? That they don't see you as theirs. He leaned on the doorframe, the wood creaking under his weight. Not yet. Clara drew in a slow breath. And you? Do you? Something flickered in his gaze. Heat, hesitation, maybe both. He pushed off the frame. Doesn't matter what I see. I'm not here to belong. I'm here to keep the fences mended and the cattle safe. But as he turned to leave, she whispered, "And me?" His back stiffened. For a long moment he didn't move. Then, without turning, he said, "You don't need me," and walked out into the night. Clara pressed a hand to her chest, furious at her own racing heart. The following week brought trouble. Signs of sabotage. A broken fence where none should have broken. Hoofprints too deep to be stray cattle. Someone had been on her land, and they hadn't come by accident. Boone found it first. At dawn, he returned with dust on his boots and a look in his eyes that made Clara's stomach sink. "Someone's trying to bleed you dry," he said flatly. "Cutting fence, driving off your cattle. If you don't put a stop to it, you'll lose half your herd before spring." Clara tightened her shawl around her shoulders. "Do you know who?" "Doesn't matter who. What matters is you need men you can trust." His gaze locked on hers. "And you don't have them." She bristled. "Then perhaps you should leave, Mr. Boone. If you don't trust this ranch, why should I trust you?" Boone stepped closer. His shadow swallowed hers on the porch. "Because the men who cut that fence aren't after your cattle. They're after you." The words hit like a slap. Clara's hand tightened on her shawl. "Me? You've got land," he said. "More than most men in this county. You've got money, and you're a widow. To them, that makes you a target. You think it's your silk dresses that make these men whisper? No, it's your fortune. They'll take it if you let them." Her throat went dry. "And you?" she whispered. "Are you here to take it too?" Boone's jaw clenched. "I've taken enough in this life. Don't mistake me for them." For a heartbeat, the air between them burned. Clara's lips parted, but she found no words. Boone's gaze dropped, just for an instant, to her mouth, before he turned and stalked away, leaving her trembling on the porch. 2 nights later, the threat came closer. Clara woke to the sound of horses, distant at first, then thundering near. Shouts. Men. She rushed to the window, heart pounding, and saw flames lick at the far barn. Her scream caught in her throat, until Boone's figure burst into the yard, rifle in hand, shouting orders to the ranch hands who had stumbled from their bunks. He moved like a storm, pulling men into action, forcing chaos into order. He charged into the barn through smoke, dragging a panicked horse out by its reins, fire glowing around his massive frame. Clara ran down the steps, skirts bunched in her hands, her lungs burning from smoke. Boone emerged from the haze, coughing, eyes red, but still standing tall with the horse thrashing beside him. He looked at her, face smeared with soot, and for once she saw something raw and unguarded in his eyes. Fear, not for himself, for her. He strode over, grabbed her arm, and pulled her away from the flames. "Get inside," he barked. "I won't hide." His grip tightened. "Now." The command in his voice rattled her to her bones. She stumbled back, not from fear of him, but from the weight of his protection. The barn burned bright behind them, but Boone didn't flinch. He stood in front of her porch steps like a wall, rifle raised, scanning the tree line until the last hoofbeats vanished into the night. By morning, the barn was ash. The air smelled of smoke and loss. Clara stood in the wreckage, her dress streaked with soot, her eyes burning. Boone walked up behind her, silent. "They'll come again," he said. Clara's jaw trembled. "And when they do?" Boone glanced down at her, his shadow falling long across the ruin. "Then I'll be here." Her breath caught. She turned her face away so he wouldn't see the tears glistening. Because for the first time since her husband's death, she believed him. The night after the fire, Clara couldn't sleep. Smoke still lingered in the air, a bitter reminder of how close she'd come to losing everything. She paced the halls of the ranch house, her bare feet whispering against the old wooden floors, her nightgown brushing her ankles as she moved from window to window. Outside, the stars burned cold. The fields stretched endless and dark, and the fences felt thin as paper against the shadows waiting beyond. She found him where she knew he'd be, sitting on the porch steps, rifle across his knees, hat pulled low. Boone looked like a sentinel carved from stone, unmoving, unflinching, watching the horizon as if it might blink first. Clara hovered in the doorway. Lantern light painted her pale skin gold, her dark hair loose down her back. For a moment she simply watched him, studying the cut of his shoulders, the way the boards creaked under his weight, the sheer size of him filling the night. "You'll keep watch all night?" she asked softly. Boone's head tilted, just enough to show he'd heard her. "Until the sun says it's safe." Her fingers tightened on the doorframe. "And when is it ever safe?" For the first time he turned, his eyes glinting under the brim of his hat. "It ain't. Not for folks who stand alone." The words sank into her chest. She stepped forward, her bare feet touching the cool wood of the porch. He didn't move, didn't stop her. She sank onto the step beside him, though the space between them could have been a canyon. "You think I'm alone?" she said after a long silence. "You are," he answered without hesitation. The bluntness stung, but it was truer than anything else she'd heard since arriving in Dry Creek. She wrapped her arms around herself, though it did nothing to keep the night chill away. "And you? You're not." Boone's jaw tightened. He stared out into the dark again, as if the horizon might offer him an answer. "Been alone long enough that I don't notice it anymore." Clara studied him in the lantern's glow. The scar near his temple, the hard set of his mouth, the wear carved deep into his skin. She wanted to ask him about the trial, about the men who swore he'd killed. She wanted to know what ghosts he carried in that broad chest. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she whispered the thing she hadn't meant to say. "You scare me." Boone's head turned slowly, his eyes locking onto hers. "Good," he said low. "Means you've got sense." But Clara didn't look away. Her pulse raced, her breath shallow, but she held his gaze. "And yet," she said, her voice shaking, "I can't seem to stay away." Something shifted in his face then, like the crack of a dam just before it breaks. Boone pushed to his feet, towering over her, rifle still in hand. For a moment she thought he'd walk inside, leave her with her foolish confession. But instead, he bent low enough that his shadow swallowed her whole. "You don't know what you're saying, Mrs. Whitmore," he murmured, voice rough as gravel. "Clara," she corrected, barely above a whisper. He hesitated, then repeated it. "Clara." Her name sounded different in his mouth, dangerous, forbidden. Before she could answer, a sound cut the night. A twig snapping, a horse snorting somewhere beyond the fence. Boone straightened instantly, all softness gone, and strode into the yard with his rifle raised. Clara followed to the edge of the porch, heart pounding, but the dark swallowed everything. Only silence answered them. When Boone returned, his face was carved with fury. "They're circling you, testing your edges. Next time they won't just burn a barn." Clara's hands trembled on the railing. "What do they want from me?" Boone's eyes burned like coals. "Everything." The days that followed were a blur of work and watchfulness. Boone tightened the fences, doubled the patrols, forced the ranch hands into discipline they hadn't known before. Men who once sneered now followed his orders, grumbling under their breath but obeying all the same. Clara saw it, saw the way he commanded not with shouts but with presence. And she saw something else. At dusk, when sweat slicked his skin and dirt clung to his arms, Boone sometimes looked up to the porch. Just once, just long enough for their eyes to catch before he turned away again. One evening, as the sun bled red across the fields, Clara carried 2 tin cups of coffee down to where he leaned against the corral. Boone accepted his without a word, his calloused fingers brushing hers just long enough to send a shiver up her arm. They stood in silence, drinking, the air thick with things neither dared say. Clara finally broke it. "Do you ever wonder if you're meant for something more?" Boone's mouth twisted, humorless. "I don't wonder about things I can't have." She turned to face him fully, her dress brushing the dust, her eyes searching his. "And what if it's standing right in front of you?" His chest rose and fell once, heavy. Then he set the cup down on the fence and walked away without answering. That night Clara couldn't breathe. The house felt too big, the silence too loud. She opened her window, the night air rushing in, and found herself staring at the yard. Boone was there again, a dark shape patrolling the shadows, rifle slung across his back. She watched until her eyes burned. And then it came. A gunshot split the night. Clara screamed, ducking instinctively, her lamp crashing to the floor. Shouts erupted outside, horses shrieking. She rushed to the window in time to see Boone firing back into the dark, his massive frame silhouetted in the flash of gunfire. The ranch hands scrambled, rifles in hand, but Boone was already moving, charging toward the tree-line like a force of nature. Clara threw open the door and ran barefoot into the yard, her nightgown whipping in the wind. A hand grabbed her, one of the men pulling her back. "Get inside, ma'am." "No," she cried, struggling, her eyes locked on the dark where Boone had disappeared. "Don't you let him go alone." But he was already gone. The fight was over in minutes. Whoever had fired vanished into the hills, leaving only the echo of hooves and the smell of powder in the air. Boone returned, rifle smoking, a cut bleeding fresh across his shoulder. He looked like death itself walking out of the dark. Clara rushed to him without thinking. "You're hurt." He waved her off. "It's nothing." She ignored him, pressing her hand against the wound, her fingers trembling as blood seeped warm through her palm. Boone's chest rose under her touch, his breath ragged, his eyes locked on her face. "You can't keep doing this," she whispered fiercely. "Throwing yourself into danger, standing between me and every shadow. You'll get yourself killed." Boone caught her wrist, his grip strong but careful. His voice was low, rough. "Better me than you." The words stole the air from her lungs. She stared at him, at the stubborn line of his mouth, at the fire in his eyes, and something inside her broke. Before she knew what she was doing, her free hand rose, brushing soot from his jaw, lingering against his skin. Boone didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. For one heartbeat, the world was nothing but them. The giant cowboy and the widow who should have been afraid but wasn't anymore. Then, as if the weight was too much to bear, Boone stepped back. His hand dropped from her wrist. His gaze hardened. "Don't," he said hoarsely. "Don't look at me like that." Clara's throat tightened. "Like what?" "Like I'm something worth saving." And with that, he turned and disappeared into the dark once more, leaving her trembling in the yard, clutching her bloody hand to her chest, torn between fury, fear, and something dangerously close to longing. The night after the gunfire left the ranch rattled. Clara sat in the parlor with a lamp burning low. Her hand still bore Boone's blood, faint stains beneath her nails that scrubbing hadn't erased. She hadn't slept. She couldn't. Every creak of the old house made her flinch. Every gust of wind across the shutters made her think of men lurking in the dark. She told herself she was safe. Boone was out there, somewhere in the yard, patrolling like the shadow of a wall. And yet safety felt like a lie. When the knock came, she startled so hard the lamp nearly toppled. She caught it just in time and turned, heart pounding. The door pushed open and Boone filled the frame. His shirt was torn at the shoulder where she had pressed her hand to stop the bleeding, the fabric dark with dried blood. His face was cut near the brow, soot and dirt streaking his skin. "I should have knocked louder," he said. His voice was gravel, low but steady. Clara rose slowly, her nightdress trailing across the floor. "You shouldn't be walking around in that condition." Boone stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The room shrank around him. "Men like me don't get the luxury of rest. You'll bleed out if you don't," she snapped, her fear sharp enough to cut. He arched a brow, amused despite the shadows under his eyes. "You planning to patch me up yourself again?" Her pulse jumped. "If I must." For a moment they stood in silence, only the hiss of the lamp filling the space. Clara forced her feet to move. She fetched water, tore strips of linen, and gestured for him to sit. Boone obeyed without a word, lowering himself onto the settee that groaned under his weight. She worked in silence, dabbing the cut above his brow, pressing cloth to his shoulder. His skin burned beneath her fingers, rough with scars old and new. He didn't flinch once, though she knew it must hurt. His gaze never left her face. "You've done this before," he said finally. "My husband," she murmured without looking up. He wasn't gentle with his fists, or with anyone else's. The words slipped out before she realized she'd spoken them. Heat rushed to her cheeks, but Boone didn't recoil. He simply held her gaze, his own eyes unreadable. "That why you bought this land?" he asked softly. "To build something that's yours, not his?" Clara's throat tightened. "Yes, and I'll die before I let anyone take it from me." Boone's jaw flexed. "Then we're of the same mind." Their eyes locked. The air between them grew heavier with each heartbeat. She should have pulled back, should have set down the cloth and stepped away. Instead, her hand lingered at his temple, fingers brushing the edge of his hair. Boone's breath slowed, his chest rising steady beneath her touch. "Clara," he said, her name low and rough, as if dragged from somewhere deep. She swallowed. "Yes." But before he could speak, the sound of boots outside shattered the moment. Loud, hurried, more than one pair. Boone was on his feet instantly, blood and bandages forgotten. He yanked the rifle from where he'd leaned it against the wall and pressed a finger to his lips. Clara froze, every muscle taut. The knock came hard this time, 3 quick thuds, urgent. Boone opened the door just enough to reveal one of the ranch hands, his face pale in the lamplight. "Fence line's been cut again," the man stammered. "Tracks lead west. At least 6 riders." Boone cursed under his breath. "Get the men mounted. I'll be there." The hand nodded and fled. Boone turned back to Clara, his face grim. "Stay inside. Bolt the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." Her breath caught. "And if you don't come back?" He paused, eyes dark, unreadable. Then he said simply, "I will," and he was gone. Clara stood in the silence he left behind, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break her ribs. She wanted to run after him, to stop him, but the memory of the fire and the gunshots held her still. Instead, she bolted the door, just as he'd said, and sank to her knees, whispering prayers she wasn't sure she believed anymore. Hours passed before she heard hooves again. The men returned battered and bruised, but alive. Boone came last, his shirt torn worse than before, mud streaking his clothes. His expression was carved from stone. "They're organized," he told her, his voice like steel. "This isn't mischief. It's war." Clara steadied herself on the table, her knees weak. "Why? Why me?" "Because your land is worth fighting for," Boone said. "And because a woman alone is easier to break." Her fear twisted into anger. She slammed her palm against the table. "I'm not easy to break." Boone's eyes flashed, and for once he didn't hold back. He crossed the room in 2 strides, towering over her, his shadow swallowing her whole. "Then prove it. Don't flinch. Don't bow. Don't let them see you scared." Her breath shook, but she lifted her chin, meeting him stare for stare. "And if I fall?" His voice dropped to a whisper, rough and raw. "Then I'll be the one to catch you." The words hung between them, thick with promise and danger both. Clara's resolve trembled. Boone looked like he wanted to close the distance, to pull her against him, but he stopped himself, fists clenched at his sides. Instead, he stepped back, his face shuddered once more. "Get some rest, Clara. Tomorrow we fight again." But she didn't sleep. The next day, Clara insisted on riding the fence lines herself. The men argued, but she silenced them with a single sharp command. If her land was worth fighting for, she would stand on it herself. Boone rode beside her, silent, watchful, a storm at her shoulder. At one broken stretch of fence, they found a message carved into the post. "Sell or burn." Clara stared at the words until her vision blurred. Boone's hand closed over her reins, steadying her horse. "They want you afraid," he said. "Don't give them that." Her voice cracked, but she forced it steady. "Let them come. I'll not sell a damn inch." Boone's gaze burned into hers, fierce and proud. "That's the woman they'll regret crossing." That evening, after the men had eaten and gone to their bunks, Clara stood alone on the porch. The stars stretched endless above, the fields whispering with night wind. Boone appeared at her side, silent as ever, rifle slung over his shoulder. "They'll test us again soon," he said. She turned to him, searching his face in the starlight. "And you'll be here?" His jaw worked. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then he said low, "Until they put me in the ground." Her heart ached. She reached for him without thinking, her hand brushing his arm, feeling the strength there. Boone caught her wrist gently, holding it between them like a fragile thing. "You don't understand what I am, Clara," he whispered. "Then show me," she whispered back. For a heartbeat he almost did. Almost. His face lowered toward hers, his breath warm, his body tense with the pull between them. Her lips parted, waiting, trembling. But Boone stopped short, his forehead brushing hers before he pulled away as if it burned him. "I can't," he rasped. Clara's voice broke. "Why not?" His eyes, shadowed and stormy, met hers. "Because men like me don't get happy endings. And I'll be damned before I drag you into my ruin." And with that, he walked into the night, leaving Clara alone beneath the stars, her heart both shattered and set ablaze all at once. The moon rode high above the Colorado plains, silver light spilling over the scrub grass and the jagged outline of the mountains. The air smelled of gunpowder and pine. Elias Boone's hand hovered close to his holster, his broad shoulders angled just enough to shield Clara behind him. He could hear it, the crunch of boots in the dirt, the slow advance of men who weren't there to talk. Clara's heart hammered so loudly she thought they might hear it. She clutched the shawl around her shoulders, her body trembling, though whether from fear or defiance, she didn't know. Ever since she stepped foot in this town, she had felt eyes on her, but tonight was different. Tonight the hatred was bared outright. "Elias Boone," a rough voice called from the darkness. "You picked the wrong woman to defend." Elias didn't flinch. "Step into the light if you've got something to say." For figures emerged, lanterns swinging low. Their faces were hard, twisted by drink and cruelty. At the front was Caleb Doran, a rancher whose pride had curdled into venom long ago. He spat into the dust. "That woman doesn't belong here. She'll ruin what's left of this town. Best you let her go back to whatever silk-lined corner she crawled out of." Clara lifted her chin. Her voice shook, but the words came sharp. "My land was bought fair. My money's as good as any of yours." A ripple of laughter broke from the men, cruel and mocking. Caleb stepped closer, eyes flicking from Clara to Elias. "See, that's your mistake. Folks like you don't get to buy your way in here. You want to stay, you pay another price." His hand slid toward his revolver. Elias moved like a storm breaking loose. His Colt was drawn before Caleb's fingers even grazed the grip of his gun. His voice cut low and steady. "Don't make me repeat myself. She stays." For a long moment, no one breathed. The lanterns swayed, the silence stretching taut like a rope about to snap. Then Caleb smirked, stepping back. "This ain't finished, Boone. You can't fight the whole town." The men slunk away, their shadows melting into the dark. Elias didn't lower his weapon until the sound of hooves carried them far off. Then he turned, his gaze finding Clara's. "You shouldn't have spoken," he muttered, though there was no anger in his tone, only fear. "If I hadn't, you'd think I was helpless," Clara said. Her voice was still shaking, but her eyes burned. "I'm not." Something in her steadiness cracked through Elias's armor. He holstered the gun and ran a hand over his face. "You're braver than I gave you credit for." She almost smiled, but the night didn't allow for softness. The danger wasn't gone. It was only waiting. By dawn, the story of what had happened spread like wildfire. Men at the saloon whispered that Boone was siding with the rich woman. Women at the well said Clara was either foolish or bewitched. And all the while, Caleb Doran sharpened his hatred, vowing he'd see Clara gone if it killed him. The day was restless, hot with dust and suspicion. Clara tried to busy herself at her small ranch house, but her hands trembled too much to stitch or read. Every knock of a shutter, every creak of the floorboards made her glance toward the door. When Elias appeared in the late afternoon, she nearly collapsed with relief. He didn't smile. "You've stirred a hornet's nest. There'll be more trouble tonight." Clara straightened. "Then I'll be ready." "Ready?" Elias's voice roughened. "Clara, this isn't society games. These men, Caleb especially, don't fight fair. You're not trained for this." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't come here to be coddled. If they want me gone, they'll have to drag me. And I won't go quietly." Elias studied her, as though weighing her words against the risks. Finally, he let out a low breath. "Then I'll teach you." He led her outside, where the dry earth stretched wide and the sun threw long shadows. He showed her how to grip a rifle, how to steady her aim against the kick. His big hands covered hers, correcting, guiding. Sweat glistened on her brow, but she didn't falter. Shot after shot rang out, echoing across the plain. At first her aim was wild, but stubbornness hardened her will. By the 6th round, she hit the post square. Elias gave a grunt of approval. "Not bad." Her lips curved. "Coming from you, that's practically a medal." His mouth twitched in what might have been a smile, though his eyes stayed serious. "Don't mistake practice for safety. Tonight, if trouble comes, you keep behind me. No arguments." Clara wanted to argue. She wanted to insist she could stand beside him. But something in the way he said it, the weight in his voice, held her back. She only nodded. As the sun dipped, painting the sky in streaks of fire, they sat on the porch. The silence was heavy, each lost in their thoughts. For Clara, it was the sharp awareness of what she had stepped into. For Elias, it was the growing realization that protecting her wasn't just duty anymore. It was something deeper, something dangerous in its own right. When the first shot cracked in the distance, both of them were already on their feet. Lantern light flickered beyond the fence line. Shadows moved, figures creeping closer. Caleb Doran hadn't come alone. Elias pulled his revolver, his body blocking Clara. "Stay low." The attackers didn't bother with warnings this time. Bullets whined past the porch, splinters flying. Clara crouched, heart slamming, but she refused to cower. She clutched the rifle, her knuckles white. Elias fired, the blast lighting his face in flashes. 2 men fell, but more kept coming. Shouts tore through the night, hoofs pounding as others circled. Clara's breath came sharp. Through the chaos, she spotted a man creeping from the side, gun raised. Without thinking, she lifted the rifle and fired. The shot cracked loud, and the man dropped, his pistol skittering into the dirt. Elias turned, eyes wide for a split second. Then he nodded once, an unspoken acknowledgement that she had just saved them both. The fight raged on. Smoke choked the air, the ground trembling with the stampede of boots. But Elias was a force, steady and merciless. Clara stayed close, her rifle ready, courage burning hot despite the fear clawing her chest. At last, the attackers broke. Caleb shouted curses, retreating into the dark with the ragged remains of his crew. The silence afterward was deafening, broken only by the rasp of Clara's breath and the low thrum of Elias reloading. When it was over, Clara dropped the rifle. Her hands shook violently, her whole body quaking from the weight of what she had done. Elias caught her as her knees buckled, his arms steady around her. "You held your ground," he said, voice rough. "You didn't run." She looked up at him, tears burning hot in her eyes. "I was so afraid." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his thumb gentle against her cheek. "Fear doesn't make you weak. What you did tonight makes you braver than most men I've known." Their eyes locked, the world shrinking down to the heat between them. For a moment, Clara forgot the blood, the gunpowder, the danger still lurking. All she felt was him, his strength, his steadiness, and the pull she couldn't fight any longer. But Elias drew back, clearing his throat. "We'll need to be ready for tomorrow. Caleb won't stop." Clara swallowed, nodding, though her heart ached from the sudden distance. She knew he was right. The war had only begun, and somewhere in the dark, Caleb Doran was already planning his next strike. The storm rolled in without warning. One moment the skies were clear, and the next, black clouds gathered, swallowing the sun. The wind carried the promise of violence, whipping through the empty streets, rattling shutters, and sending dust spiraling. Felt like the town itself was holding its breath. Inside the saloon, Clara Whitmore stood frozen in the doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had just stepped in when the crack of a rifle split the air, the sound too close, too sharp. Glass shattered somewhere upstairs. The piano player stopped mid-note, his hands suspended. And then Elias Boone appeared. The giant cowboy filled the frame of the staircase as if carved from shadow and storm. His broad shoulders seemed even wider beneath his weather-darkened coat. His hat pulled low over his eyes. There was blood on his knuckles, a dark smear across his jaw, but he didn't flinch. His gaze swept the room like a blade, locking instantly on Clara. "Get behind me," he growled, the words steady, commanding. She moved before she even realized it, pressing herself close, the warmth of his frame like a wall against the chaos. Around them, the saloon erupted. Men scrambled for cover, chairs overturned, cards and coins scattered across the floor. The storm outside was nothing compared to the war about to ignite inside. Upstairs, a bootstep creaked, then another. Sheriff Halverson's voice called out, sharp and cruel, "Boone, you think you can steal from me, embarrass me in my own damn town, and walk away breathing? Think again." Elias's jaw tightened. His hand hovered near his holster, the weight of his Colt heavy at his hip. But he didn't draw. Not yet. Clara's fingers brushed his arm, trembling. "Elias, please." He turned his head slightly, just enough for her to see the flicker of something in his eyes. Not fear, not even rage. Something harder. Promise. The sheriff stepped into view, rifle cocked, his deputy slinking just behind him. The man's face was twisted with pride, but his eyes carried something weaker, doubt. Elias had humiliated him the night before, stripping away his power in front of the townsfolk, and humiliation was a poison that demanded blood. "Drop the gun, Boone," Halverson snarled, "or I'll put the rich woman in the dirt first." Clara stiffened. All eyes turned toward her, the room bristling with the sheriff's threat. She knew he meant it. He would kill her not out of necessity but to prove Elias could not protect her. Elias's lips pressed thin. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward, placing himself fully between her and Halverson. His voice was low, steady as stone. "You ain't touching her. You want me? Then come for me." The sheriff spat, his face red. "You're too damn big for this world, Boone. Too proud. Time you learned what it feels like to kneel." And with that, the deputy fired. The blast tore through the railing, splinters exploding into the air. Clara gasped, dropping low. Elias moved faster than the eye could follow. His gun flashing from his holster, the report booming through the room like thunder. The deputy crumpled where he stood, his rifle clattering against the floorboards. Chaos ignited. Patrons screamed, some bolting for the door, others diving under tables. The sheriff ducked back upstairs, firing wildly as he retreated. Bullets whistled through the saloon, shattering bottles, ripping into plaster. Clara covered her head, her heart racing so fast it hurt, and then Elias grabbed her hand. His voice was rough but urgent. "We're getting out." She stumbled after him as he barreled through the back door, dragging her into the storm. Rain hammered down in heavy sheets, soaking them instantly. The street was nearly deserted, the storm driving everyone inside. Lightning split the sky, followed by a crack of thunder that rattled her bones. They ran, boots splashing through mud. Clara's skirts dragged heavy with rain, slowing her, but Elias never let go. He pulled her along with the strength of a man who refused to let fate have her. Behind them, the sheriff's voice bellowed, carried by the storm. "You can't run, Boone. I'll hunt you down. Both of you." Elias didn't look back. He didn't need to. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the town. They reached the livery stable, and he shoved the door open, pulling her inside. The smell of hay and horses hit her nose, grounding her in the moment. He moved quickly, saddling his horse with practiced hands, his motions fast but precise. Clara, breathless, tried to help, fumbling with straps, her fingers numb from the cold. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, shaking. "You should have left me." His hand caught her wrist, stopping her words. He bent low, his face inches from hers, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. His voice was low, a rumble in the dark. "Don't ever say that again. I'd burn this town to ash before I let them touch you." Her chest tightened, her throat dry. She searched his eyes, seeing the truth in them. Fierce, unbreakable, dangerous, and hers in some way she could not explain. The horse reared slightly, sensing the storm, but Elias steadied it, lifting Clara up into the saddle before swinging up behind her. His arms caged her in, the sheer size of him dwarfing her. The warmth of his chest pressed against her back as he gripped the reins. The storm howled as they thundered out of the stable, hoofs pounding against the sodden earth. Wind tore at Clara's hair, rain stung her skin, but she clung tight, her fear drowned out by the wild rush of escape. The sheriff's men gave chase, their shouts lost to the storm. Gunshots cracked, sparks flashing in the rain, but Elias urged the horse faster, every stride carrying them farther from Cold Creek. Clara twisted to look back, lightning illuminating the chaos. The sheriff on horseback, rage burning in his eyes, his men flanking him like wolves. The chase stretched into the open prairie, the storm a living beast around them. Mud flew, hooves struck sparks on stone. Elias's grip was firm, steady, his breath hot against Clara's ear. "Hold on," he said. She did. Not just to him but to the unshakable certainty that whatever waited ahead, blood, danger, or ruin, it was better than what they left behind. The prairie stretched endless, black and wet. The storm swallowed the world whole, but Clara felt something new inside her chest. Not just fear, not just survival, something rawer, sharper, trust, and beneath that, a dangerous, undeniable pull. When dawn finally broke, gray and bleak, they were miles from town. The storm had passed, leaving the land soaked and steaming, the air heavy with the smell of wet earth. They slowed near a grove of cottonwoods, the horse lathered with sweat, Clara trembling from exhaustion. Elias dismounted first, then reached up and lifted her down as if she weighed nothing. Her legs nearly gave out, but his arms caught her, strong and steady. For a moment, she stayed there, pressed against him, listening to the thunder of his heartbeat beneath her cheek. She pulled back only enough to look up at him. "You saved me." He shook his head. "Not yet." The sheriff was still out there. The town was lost to them now, and ahead, only uncertainty stretched. But as Clara looked at the man before her, the giant cowboy who had risked everything, she felt the truth burn in her bones. She would follow him, wherever it led. The town of Dry Creek lay hushed under a blood-red sunset, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and fear. Clara Whitmore stood at the edge of Main Street, her breath coming fast, her gloves smeared with dust. Her whole body shook, though not from weakness. No, this was the tremor of someone who had walked through fire and was now daring to stand in the open flames. Behind her, the townsfolk pressed against the porches, their voices low, their eyes darting between her and the saloon where everything had unraveled. Chairs overturned, glass shattered, and the heavy silence of men who had run out of words filled the air. Inside, Elias Boone lay slumped against the far wall, his shirt soaked through with blood. The giant cowboy, who had always looked untouchable, had fallen to his knees earlier that night when Randall Harlan's bullet tore into his side. Clara had thrown herself in front of him, desperate and reckless, refusing to move even when Randall's revolver hovered inches from her chest. Now, the outlaw who had shadowed their every step for weeks was gone, dragged away in irons after Elias wrestled him down despite his wound. It should have been over, but the ache in Clara's chest told her the fight was still far from finished. She stepped back inside, her skirts sweeping over broken glass. The saloon reeked of whiskey and smoke, but all she saw was Elias, struggling to keep his eyes open, breathing ragged. His hands, usually steady as stone, trembled where they pressed against his wound. "Don't you dare leave me," she whispered, kneeling at his side. "Not now. Not after all of this." He looked at her then, those storm-gray eyes softening through the pain. "Clara," his voice was rough, like gravel dragged across steel. "You were supposed to run. I told you to save yourself." Her jaw clenched, tears burning hot but refusing to fall. "And I told you, Elias Boone, that I'd stand beside you, even if it killed me. Did you think I was just saying pretty words?" A weak laugh escaped him, cut short by a groan. "You're too good for this place. Too good for a man like me." She reached for his face, cupping it in both hands. "Don't you dare say that. You've carried the weight of this whole town on your shoulders, and they've spat on you for it. But I see you, the man under all that silence, the man who's been too big for this world, but not for me." His breath shuddered. His lips parted as though he wanted to argue, but the strength left him. His eyes fluttered shut. Panic clawed through her chest. "No, no, Elias, stay with me. Look at me." Her voice broke, raw with fear. "You said you'd protect me. Well, now I'm protecting you. Do you hear me? You don't get to leave me here." The doctor pushed through the crowd then, an older man with weary eyes and steady hands. He knelt beside Elias without a word, prying Clara's blood-soaked hands away gently. She resisted, but he gave her a firm look. "If you want him to live, let me work." She stumbled back, clutching her skirts, watching as the doctor barked for cloth, for whiskey, for anything to stop the bleeding. The minutes stretched into hours, the sound of Elias's labored breathing scraping at her soul. At some point, the townsfolk drifted out, leaving only Clara, the doctor, and the man whose presence had reshaped her life. The lamps burned low. Shadows danced across the walls like ghosts. Clara sat at his side, holding his hand even as the doctor stitched the wound. Her thoughts spun back to the moment she first laid eyes on him. A giant of a man leaning against a post, hat low, a figure too big for the narrow streets of Dry Creek. Everyone feared him then, whispered about his temper, his strength. But she remembered the way he had looked at her, like she wasn't just another rich woman passing through. Like he saw past the money, the polished manners, the fine clothes. And now, as dawn crept pale across the horizon, she realized she would rather have one broken, bloodied cowboy by her side than all the wealth in the world. The doctor tied the last stitch inside. "He'll live, if he's as stubborn as he looks. But the next few days will decide it." Clara nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She bent low, her lips brushing Elias's ear. "Do you hear that? You're not allowed to give up. You told me once I was too soft for this land. Well, now I'm telling you, you're too strong to leave it. To leave me." His hand squeezed hers. Barely there, but enough. She gasped, eyes flying to his face. His eyes were still closed, but that squeeze, it was a promise. Relief crashed over her, leaving her shaking. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering over and over, "I'll try, Elias. Too big for me or not. I'll try. I'll always try." Outside, the town stirred. People whispered about the rich widow and the giant cowboy, about how she had thrown herself in front of a bullet for him. Some said it was madness. Others swore it was the first real love story Dry Creek had ever seen. For Clara, none of that mattered. She had made her choice. The world could talk all it wanted, but her heart had already spoken. She would stay. She would fight. And if it meant taming the wildest man the West had ever known, then so be it. Because in the end, it wasn't about being too big or too small, too rich or too rough. It was about finding someone who fit in the places no one else could. And as the first light of day kissed the wounded cowboy's face, Clara knew she had found exactly that. And that's how a rich woman with more pride than friends, and a cowboy too big for the world around him, found a love no one believed could last. But their story doesn't end here. Out on the frontier, every sunrise carried new dangers, new whispers, new trials. If you want to see how far Clara and Elias can go, how much they'll risk, and how much they'll gain, make sure you stay with us. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and join me for the next tale, because the West always has another secret waiting.